What if one of the most powerful tools for your mental and physical health has been with you your entire life, and you've been mostly ignoring it? Today on the Reaching Higher podcast, I sit down with Charlie Baldwin, a breathing instructor and teacher with the Art of Living, a global wellness organization founded in 1981 that now reaches over 185 countries. Charlie's journey is a compelling one. From a college student battling depression and on the verge of dropping out, to a certified instructor teaching transformative breathwork techniques at universities, retreat centers, and beyond. We dig into the science behind sky breathing, why your breath is a biological lever for your emotions, and how to win over even the most skeptical newcomers. Let's get into it. Charlie, I'm excited to have you here today, and thank you for rolling with the technical difficulties up front. But
Great to be here.
excited to have this conversation.
Me too. Me too. Thanks for having me.
Well, one of the things that I love to do is I always love to get sort of the origin story from any of our guests before we get into the meat of the conversation. So, you're an instructor for a group called the Art of Living.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit more about the organization, and then you have this world-renowned leader named I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but uh, Guru Dev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar.
Nailed it.
Um,
Yeah.
so, tell us a little bit about the org, and tell us a little bit about your fearless leader.
Yeah. So the Art of Living has a story starting back in 1981. So that's when Gurudev founded the Art of Living. And he was actually teaching meditation for some time before starting the Art of Living. He was teaching meditation with, you may be familiar with Transcendental Meditation Organization.
Yes.
So he was teaching with Maharishi, and he was noticing that there were people were having some trouble getting into deeper states of meditation. He was just thinking that there was something that another tool or something that people could use to get into deeper levels of meditation. And he actually went into a period of silence for 10 days on a river in India. And how he describes it is that the the rhythm of the breathwork, the specific breathwork technique, the sky breathing, which is the practice that I do every day and that I teach students at retreats. He said that it came to him like a poem would come to an artist, something like that. And he started sharing this wisdom with people in houses. People would invite him, and then in India, and then people in the United States invited him, and so he started teaching in Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, Lake Tahoe, and now 41 years later, it's in over 180, maybe over 185 countries now, and really big in Latin America, in all over Europe, certainly in India, and really all over the world. And yeah, so I got involved with one of there's so many different demographics that Art of Living has programs for, from veterans to prison inmates to kids in grade school. And I was exposed to these techniques when I was at university. I went to Lehigh University, and I had actually been interested. I already had an interest for meditation and breathwork for a couple years, and was trying out some different things. I was dabbling with different techniques here and there, mostly from it was kind of like the earlier days of YouTube and blogs, and I was just reading and consuming as much as I could about those things. But I was still, I was going through a rough period where I wouldn't have used these words at the time, but I definitely had some level of depression where I was staying in bed all day. I had already dropped out of one of my classes that semester. I was skipping school, like skipping my other classes, and I was about to drop out of school. But one of my friends who he was a PhD student and he knew I was interested in this stuff. He said, before you make any big decision, why don't you come and at least do this retreat? You're already interested in this stuff, and then just see what happens, and make a decision after that. And so I trusted this guy because I could tell he was doing something right. I couldn't put my finger on it. And I went and I did this retreat for the Art of Living. It was for the Sky. It was called Sky Campus Happiness Retreat. That's what it's called at universities. And I didn't have any crazy aha moments where I was like, I'm gonna teach this in just a few years. I'm gonna teach college students, and I can't wait to bring this to other people. It wasn't like that, but there was something that just stuck with me that said, if I do this practice, this breath work every day, I think good things will happen. I mean, it was very vague like that. I was just like, I think that the good things will happen if I commit to doing this for some time. And yeah, after just a few maybe 6 weeks or so of doing the practice every day. By winter break, I remember looking around and thinking, yeah, something has changed. Something has definitely changed. I'm more energy, more confidence, things that were like overwhelming or I couldn't grapple with all of a sudden became more manageable for me. And so that was my introduction. And then slowly over time I started organizing courses at my university, and then eventually became a teacher myself and started teaching these retreats at universities and for many other demographics as well.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that story and the fact that, you did deal with depression, which is a real thing. And I think a lot of people like to sweep that under the carpet. And, so thank goodness you met
I was
this
doing a good job of that in college. I was sweeping it under the carpet very well.
called masking, according to my kids, because
Mm.
I know more about this topic than I should. I'm actually going to skip a question and we'll go back, but I want to talk about this breath as a biological lever in the sky
Mm.
breath meditation, which has been studied at places like Yale, Harvard, and Stanford with some striking results. And part of why I want to get into this is it's the science of this, right? And this will actually maybe lead more naturally into my last question, which is it takes your cortisol down, right? Your vagal tone up. And so for someone who's never thought about their breath as a tool, how do you explain like why something so automatic can be so transformative? Because I think most of
Yeah.
us don't ever think about our breathing other than if we're short of breath or
Yeah.
we're having a hard time, like, we're whatever. But the fact that it actually has profound scientific and physiological impacts on our body.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something, I mean, I remember going to this, my first Art of Living retreat, and hearing that each each emotion that we're experiencing has a corresponding rhythm or type of breath that's associated with it. And that was something that I never had heard before, but then it was so obvious. Like, yeah, of course, like we do breathe a certain way when we're angry. We breathe a certain way when we're sad. There's that that sigh, the long exhale. There's a certain rhythm to breath when we're overjoyed, when we see a long lost friend we haven't seen in a while, and we wow. So these rhythms of breath they're intimately linked to our emotions, and one of the core ideas behind breath work is that this is not just a one-way street, that it's not just that our emotions have these has this effect of the rhythm of breath changing, but that we can use the breath in certain rhythms, use it in certain ways that impact our state of mind and our emotions as well. So this is one of these aspects. But then back to your point, what you're talking about is that what you mentioned is we're not even aware of the breath as something that's happening throughout the day. And yet the breath is this key source of energy that we can't live without for a few minutes, right? It's this key foundational source of energy. Often when we think about, like, let's say it's the afternoon and we're tired and our brain goes to, okay, I'm tired, so there's one of two things I can do. I'm going to eat food or I'm going to go to sleep.
Mhm.
Normally that we choose one of these two things. But the breath is like we're sitting on this untapped source of energy that used with just a little techniques to unlock some of the power in the breath, you can tap into that as another powerful source of energy. So these are a couple ways that I like to explain on these maybe information sessions or at the beginning of retreats for people that are a little bit like, I don't get it. I breathe all the time. Like how's there a whole retreat on breathing? That doesn't make sense. So but I think it's clear that there's so many secrets that are in the breath that need just a little bit of technique and a little bit of wisdom on that connection of the breath and mind to unlock.
Well, it makes sense. And I think it's a natural tee up for the next question, which is you said when you kind of took the plunge because a friend took you to the Art of Living session, the breathing session,
Mhm.
you're now an instructor, but I'm sure you get a lot of people who are pragmatists who don't walk in the door as wellness believers. Maybe a friend dragged them along or they're like, okay, I guess I'll do
Yeah.
this. So what's your opening move when someone's, got their folded arms and are essentially screaming, I don't do this stuff.
I mean, the first thing, this happens all the time, right? Like when I teach at the Art of Living Retreat Center, which is our biggest center in North America, often we'll have maybe a group of friends that come where one of them was just dragged along, or a couple that someone dragged their husband, someone dragged their wife and said, just come and do this thing with me. And so this is not uncommon at all. Like this happens. And in that setting, what we always like to convey is just that, just see this with that experimental point of view, that this is a these are tools that, no one, you can go through your whole life, but I went through all of my high school and through a part of my college not even being aware of some of these connections in this of the breath and the mind, and some of these tools that are so obvious on one hand, but we don't give them any attention, and so we actually can miss some of the value and the practicality of it. So I always, invite people to see these things as an experiment. And these retreats are not it's not like 4-hour lectures and just, here's a technique, take this wisdom, go home with it, put it in your toolbox, and you're done. It's a very interactive process. There's a lot of interactive things that happen. And so one of the core things we like to get out of the gate is we want to hear people's authentic experience. And that however you're experiencing these things, especially in the beginning, when you're first getting used to it, sometimes it's uncomfortable, sometimes it's unpleasant, sometimes you have thoughts you haven't thought about in a while that you don't want to think about. All of these things are normal experiences that we like to, and this is why we like to create that container of a space of a retreat, of learning this technique over a few days, as opposed to just, here, come do this 1-hour session and you'll learn sky breath meditation. Because there's some value of having a live teacher, whether it's over Zoom or in person, where someone can answer your questions. You can really have a back and forth about, well, this was my experience, how come they experienced that, what's up with that? So those are some of the things that we talk about to create that container of even the most skeptical of people can have some experience at the end. And that's the thing too, is now that we're 40 some years into it, the fact that we have over 100 and I want to say it's 120 research papers now about the effects of sky breath meditation, and there's so many articles and things, and it's way different than the people who were teaching it in like the 80s and 90s of the objections that they had to deal with. Almost always when I sit down, even if there are some high skeptical people in the room, there's a lot of people that are like, oh no, I've been reading about breathwork and meditation for 10 years now. I finally realized that I need to try it out. So I think I have an easier time than some of the teachers of the past.
That's fair. And actually, it gives me a funny thought, which I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Anchorman. Might have been a little before your time with Will Ferrell, but one of the things that they talk about is, this idea of jogging or running, right? Where I think one of the characters is going out and he calls it yogging, because back in the 80s, no one knew what that was. And so definitely easier today when it's much more of a prevalent thing than back in the day. This next one was sort of intriguing to me, which is you talk about in your sessions firefighters, and they're trained to run toward things that for most normal, human beings trigger things. Their fight or flight, right? It's like there's a fire, there's danger, get away. So what does resilience look like for these people whose job literally requires them to override that response? And what do they take home from their sessions? Because I know you work with first responders and firefighters.
Yeah, and over the last couple of years, we've done some sessions with firefighters, and I've done actually a lot of work with law enforcement, and both local law enforcement in our area in North Carolina, as well as highway patrol. And same principle, you're just saying, the people that are trained to be very vigilant of what's happening, and the brain is going to what are the possible problems, and how can I immediately solve it or run toward it. And what we hear is that that type of thinking is necessary for being on the job. That the level of vigilance that you need to have in a critical situation, if you're in law enforcement, the cortisol pumping through the body is a natural thing. This isn't breath work isn't something that's going to cut this off. But what we hear time and again is that these law enforcement officers or first responders feel like they don't have the tools to turn that part of their brain off when it's time to be, okay, I've taken the badge off for the day, and now instead of trooper, I need to be husband or father or school board member, whatever it is. And one of the stories that we've heard many times from law enforcement specifically is that they want to have a nice family outing. They want to go to an amusement park, or they want to go somewhere public with their family. But their mind is still in law enforcement mind, looking for all the threats, where they don't even enjoy going out in public anymore. And so they want to, they want to avoid those situations at all costs, which is understandable when that is when that's their job. or they find that when they come home to, their husband or wife, that they're so used to dealing with these huge problems of life or death situations that the problem at home with the kid is so minor that it just gets brushed off, and that creates a lot of tension in the family. And so one of the things that the breath work and meditation can do is, it's not that we are not going to have to play those roles of those intense roles of the hypervigilance in those situations, but having a mechanism, having a tool where you can process some of those intense things that happen on the job so that you can allow your mind to relax and be present in situations where you don't need to be hypervigilant. That's one of the main benefits that the law enforcement talk about after they do our retreats. And some of the things, one of the quotes specifically that I've heard time and again over the last couple of years with law enforcement is that they have said, I have not been able to shut my brain off like this since I was a kid. They just feel as though there's a constant stream of things of the checklist running through their head to be able to make sure everything is in order, that they really appreciate that time where they can turn off their brain, and then that actually makes you more energetic for when you have to go back to work. So those are some of the things that we've been hearing from that demographic.
Well, it makes sense. And I wouldn't ever have thought of it that way, but I can totally see how making them more present at home and with their families and or just in life in general, because they do have to live such a compartmentalized life, right? Where it's the embrace the cortisol and now turn off the cortisol. And so I appreciate that answer. This is a related question. And obviously we know a lot of today's youth have a difficult time because they're bombarded with social media. I mean, all of us are, but they've grown up with it. And I think it's such a integral part of the culture of, kids that are 12 through 25, let's say. So in talking with, younger people who are facing this nonstop digital noise, what's the specific challenge with these, the younger generation? And is it an attention span, cynicism, identity, or something else? And how do you meet them where they are, through these exercises?
Yeah, that's a good question. And of those things that you listed, immediately my head goes, yes, I think it's a little bit of all of those things that I've heard. There is some cynicism there. There is some just general overwhelm. One of the things that I have heard from teaching on college campuses is there is a sense that there is just so much stimulation that is out there. There's so many different ways that people are being connected. There's so many ways that people are being entertained now. There's just infinite amount of things that you can consume online. And what I hear is that overstimulation can in the digital world can lead to a dullness or a staleness in the actual world. And this has been my experience too, as someone who grew up with, I was probably in high school and in college when YouTube was really taking off, but then it was really in the 2010s, middle 2010s, when really things started to become more optimized to keep people's eyeballs on even longer and longer. And so that was a big struggle for me as well in college and starting into the workforce of how to deal with all of this stimulation that you have, all the information that you have access to. And this is where I remember saying, when I was first starting to lead meditations on college campuses, that I was sort of presenting meditation and the breathwork techniques as like this luxury that you can, this is this tool that many people aren't using, that you can use to have that extra clarity, the extra focus, that have reduce those signals that are those irrelevant signals that are kind of always trying to trigger your brain, reduce those in a way that gives you an advantage. And now I really see it almost as like this necessity now, with how much stimulation that there is, that I couldn't even tell you what the average screen time now is for Gen Z. I'm sure it's more hours than I would be prepared to hear. But the fact of the matter is that the more we expose ourselves to that stimulation, the more the mind needs to rest at some point, or else it won't get up to its optimal level again. And so this is where I see these techniques being so powerful, is that now that we live in a society where it's the norm to have, I don't know how many more magnitudes of information that we're exposed to. Now that that's the norm, we need to have the balance of having more spaces of quiet in our days as well. And this is one of the tools that the breath can really help with, where people who may sit and think, I can never meditate, my mind is too loud. this is where that tool of the breath can help guide the mind back into the present moment.
Well, it's a good answer, and it's interesting. It brought to mind a phenomena that I just looked up. It's called anhedonia, and it's essentially in drug users where one of the problems they get is like whether it's heroin or cocaine or whatever, they set their pleasure threshold so high that they can actually never achieve that with anything else, right? And so I hadn't ever thought of kids with content and all their digesting really sort of creating that threshold with non-drug related but content related. So that was an interesting epiphany that you just gave me.
That's a great analogy, and I think that I read this book a few years ago called Dopamine Nation. I wish I could remember the author. It's yeah, so woman doctor, Anna something. Anyway, Dopamine Nation, really great book, and she talks exactly what you're saying. Is people, when now that it's the norm to be exposed to so many dopamine hits in a day, there has to be some way to balance it, or else our level of energy and our enthusiasm for life is just going to be at a dull level.
Anna Lemke, Dr. Anna Lemke,
That's it.
Lemb as in boy, Ke. I just looked it up. So thank you for sharing. We'll put that in the show notes. So this next one, I want to get into something that's probably you run into a lot, right? Which is whenever you belong to this large movement, I think as you mentioned 160 plus nations strong, it's millions of people. You have this guru that's been around since the 80s, right? And so there's always this talk of like, is this a cult or is this a wellness experience? And so my question is this. So you work with faith communities, right? And that probably adds a layer of interesting complexity to this. And so, you know, in working with them and being respectful of their spiritual frameworks, where do you find the most unexpected common ground?
Yeah, this is a good question because it's something that definitely comes up. There can be big skepticism when we talk to not just the faith community, but any communities, whether it's law enforcement or even on college campuses. But I mean, for me, I always like to just share. So my story. So I was raised Presbyterian, and I went to church, and my spiritual journey really started through the Christian tradition when I was in high school, going into college, and I really feel that connection with Jesus, but I will say that there was this period of time when I was getting into these practices of the East, of yoga and breathwork, and where I really thought that there was this big conflict. Like I thought this was, but I have these real experiences with my faith growing up. How do I sort this out with these experiences that I'm having with the wisdom of the East? Like they seem to be so conflicting. And it was really after some time and really through my time with the Art of Living and some of Gurudev's wisdom about, he gives so many discourses on the mind and consciousness and other religions, all sorts of religions as well, where I realized that I started to deepen my appreciation for some of the traditions that I grew up with. That I remember this one time at a Christmas service in the church that I grew up in Pittsburgh, that I realized I had a newfound appreciation for the hymns that we were singing on Christmas. And I had a newfound appreciation for some of the rituals that we did in the service that I only had because of my experience with the Art of Living. And so when we talk to faith groups, we really present this as like, this is it's a technology to give you. It's a technology of the breath and the body and the mind, and that the core of the Art of Living is spirituality. That although Gurudev himself grew up in the Hindu tradition, the wisdom of the Vedas, the wisdom of the Yoga Sutras, is really technology for all humanity to enliven the spirit within that can be found in all the different religions. And so one of the things, and this actually keeps coming up on either podcasts or even just conversations with friends, of that one of my favorite quotes that Gurudev says about just this general topic is that religion is like the banana peel, and spirituality is like the banana. And so with using the breath, the wisdom to how to learn the breath does not belong to any one nation or any one religion any more than Italian food just belongs to Italians. There's many people that loves going to Italian restaurants and should enjoy that cuisine. And in that same way, the hope of the Art of Living is that these tools and techniques will enliven the spirituality and the juiciness within any person who's open to that in whatever their respective religion is. And that's been my personal experience. So that's why I'm very I love sharing and having that dialogue with other faith leaders. And at the same time, I understand that for some people that doesn't seem compatible, and I can respect that for sure. But I do love just sharing that part of my story as well.
Well, I appreciate that honest answer. It's actually a really good answer. I'm not a religious person. I grew up in a religion, but I consider myself to be spiritual. And I've always wondered, why it is that we don't, as the West, embrace more of, some of the practices of the East, whether that be religious, whether that be medicine, whether it
Mhm.
be whatever, because, that's a society that in general has lived a lot more years for us and has been a civilization for a lot more years than we have in the West. So I do appreciate that, and I love the idea that it's a tool versus anything else. And so thank you for indulging me on that. I do want to shift gears to something. It's called the World Culture Festival,
Yeah.
and you've taught events there with over 1 million attendees, which is a lot, like order of magnitude. I remember the first talk I gave in front of an audience of, I want to say there were probably 2,000 people, and this was after most of the audiences being 200, maybe 300. And it's mind blowing, like just what a difference it makes. So, what changes for you when that scale goes from an intimate retreat to a crowd that size?
Hmm.
Does the work feel different, or does the breath always bring it back to the same place?
Yeah, I was at two of the last World Culture Festivals. So the one in 2016 in Delhi, I was a dancer on the stage. So was a performer in that one, and that was a tremendous experience dancing in front of I think there was 1 million people that were in front of me, and that was wild. And then this last one in DC, which I can't believe that was almost 3 years ago now, which was in the fall of 2023. I was one of the MCs for the event, and so although I was certainly interacting with the crowd and was helping move things along, it was really Gurudev at that event who was the one leading people into the meditation and through the processes of it. And although I can't really speak to so much of the teaching at that level, what I will say is to meditate with that many people in one space, especially in a place as central to the country as the National Mall, in front of the National Monument, between the National Monument and the Capitol building, was like that was one of the most special moments of my life. That so many people were sitting to meditate for, just for a comment of like, we want peace, we want good things, we want positive things for this country, and we want to bring all these cultures from around the world, and we want to celebrate the diversity, celebrate the uniqueness of it, and also celebrate the unity of it. That on the surface, we all are different. We have different cultures, we have different cuisines, we have different rituals. But then when we go one layer deeper, we can all see that there's also a common thread of humanity. And that's what the meditation, I feel like, can tap into. So I feel like it was this powerful combination of both things, of that the outer celebration of all the beautiful differences, and then that inner stillness of like, okay, we're all also human and we're all going through the same human experience. And so it was both of those World Culture Festivals were like very pivotal moments for me of just seeing. I feel like it was a moments for seeing what I feel like kind of a glimpse of like a vision of a positive future for our society would be, is that balance there of the celebrating the differences and like honoring the humanness underneath as well.
Yeah. Well, more of that, please.
Yeah.
So that good description. I want to talk a little bit about you personally. So one of the
Yeah.
things that I got in putting this together is people describe your style as genuinely funny, which isn't exactly the first word most people would associate with someone that's a breathwork instructor. So how does humor, like in your function, what does it do as a teaching tool, a trust builder, and talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is something that I I didn't really think that there was. Yeah, I don't know if I say I didn't think that there was a place for this, but I had not experienced that there was a place for humor and playfulness in the realm of spirituality and religion, or just any practices like meditation or breath work or any of that technology. I didn't think that there was space for that humor and playfulness until I got to the art of living. And that was really that was just the concept in my head. And I think for me, seeing how Gurudev like navigates that path where there is so much humor and playfulness in these what are also seemingly very deep topics and very have very profound implications in our lives, But that for me was like a breath of fresh air when I came to the art of living. It was like, oh, there is a place for silliness and playfulness and humor. And in fact, the longer that I've been on this journey, the more that I see that that's not like a just a nice to have. I do see how that's like an integral part of I mean, dare I say, like the art of living is having that humor, which I have found is so key to having that right environment for learning these techniques. Like we talked about at the beginning, when people are skeptical sometimes coming into retreat, and there's when you learn something as subtle as like the breath and meditation, it's very important to have that cordial, loose environment. It's and this is something that I really learned from Gurudev, is that having a very stiff environment where it's so formal and so where you feel stiff or you can't be your authentic self actually inhibits from learning those subtle techniques, because what we're really learning is about how to unwind some of these traps that the mind gets stuck in, or unwinding some of the tension that gets stored in the body. So to do that, it's so important to have that cordial, loose environment so people can feel free to be themselves. And I feel like humor is just such an integral part of that.
It makes sense. I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball, not a bad one,
Please,
but
yeah.
and we may or may not be able to do this on this, but I'm wondering, could we take 90 seconds before we get into sort of our final lighter questions that I ask all the guests, and show us a little bit? Some people will be able to see this on YouTube. I can see you. Let's be mindful of those listening in. But is this sort of like the beginning of this process where it's what do the first 90 seconds look like as you're starting to get into the breath work with a class, assuming maybe there are people that have never done this before?
Are you saying like what words would I be saying, or like a technique or something, like the first?
Either or. Like, I'd love to show people who are listening to this, like, what the hell is this breath work that this guy Charlie is talking about? So like, what would we do to start to, like, is it the traditional, we're going to count, breathe in for 6 seconds and then we're going to breathe out, and like, where do our minds need to be going, like any of that stuff? And again, we don't have a ton of time to do it, but I'd love to just get a taste and give the audience a little bit of a taste for that.
Yeah, one of the first techniques that we learn on the course is some, you may have practices. Some people may have heard of this before. It's called victory breath, or maybe you've heard ujjayi breath. And what is that? The breath, it's actually a breath that's very natural to us. Babies tend to breathe like this. One way you can start to get a feel of what the ujjayi breath is imagining it's a cold winter day and you're trying to fog a window in front of you. And so how do you breathe?
That's a good way to describe it. I totally get like what that is, and seeing you do that.
There's a sound, right, associated with it. You can hear the sound. And now it's that same breath to do the ujjayi breath, that victory breath. It's doing that same thing, but with the mouth closed, both on the exhale and the inhale. I don't know if you'll be able to hear it through the computer, but I'll try to exaggerate a little bit so you can hear. So I'm not sure if you can hear it through the computer, but there's still a slight sound that's coming from the back of the throat, even though the air is coming in and out through the nose. And one of the main things that this ujjayi breath does is it helps lengthen and helps smoothen that breath, so that we use it as a building technique for other techniques. But even just ujjayi breath on its own, it's so powerful because you can do it anywhere, right? It's so portable. Even if you're on the phone in the middle of a difficult conversation, they don't even have to know you're doing it, right? Just a few deep ujjayi breaths with that slight attention in the back of the throat can help bring the mind back into the present moment and back into a way where it's serving us.
Well, this might be psychosomatic, but I felt like even just doing a few of those along with you, I feel more relaxed. So I will definitely give that a try out. And thank you for indulging me on that as well. The last few questions here, if you're up for it. So one of the things that I like to sort of share is like, what's spinning someone's gears, right? So is there a podcast or a show or a book or whatever that you're binging, reading right now? Ideally something lighter or funny that's got your attention.
Oh, what am I? This is very niche, but okay. I'm a big fan of the show Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know. It's a very popular
Yep.
show. It came out when
Yep.
I was like the age of the characters like in the show. So I've been a fan
Yep.
for over 20 years. And there's this guy on TikTok, Brandon Talk, I think is his name, who does an analysis of each of the episodes. And as someone who thought I have thought about this show from every angle over the last 20 years, his media literacy and way of talking about the show with like a spiritual bent to it as well is has been a big joy for me. So that's, I know it's pretty niche if you're on TikTok, but that's what I'm diving into right now. That's like the only reason I go on TikTok.
Great backstory, and I niche is totally fine. So, you just mentioned, being at these huge festivals, right, of millions of people, both in India and then in the United States here. So I'm assuming you probably met some important people in your life. Who's impressed you the most?
Okay, who's impressed me the most? Wow, that's a good question. So, my first answer is when I met Gurudev. Okay, that's like a cheap, that's like I think he's my meditation teacher, but I didn't know what to expect when I was going to meet him. Because I had read his books and I'd been interested in his books for a while, so I had a lot of like, well, who is this guy? And there's something about, especially just meditating in his presence, that I do feel like there's something special going on that I can't put my finger on. Um, but in terms of like the like at the festivals or um uh who have I been impressed with the most? I feel like I don't know, I'm blanking so much. I feel like there was like a few people that were in like my mind earlier that I'm like totally blanking on now. So I may have to come back to that.
We can come back to that, and obviously, Guru Dev would be a good one since he is the big boss, right, and has done some impressive things. Over the course of your life, biggest regret?
One of my big, I think, and this is one that I remember thinking about more in college that I don't think about so much now, but I, I was a big, I played so many sports growing up, like every sport I was playing growing up. And then I really kind of focused in playing tennis in high school and then recreational basketball. But I had this thought, I think it was like my junior, senior year, that my favorite sport in middle school was football. And I loved middle school football. And I was too small to start when it was going into freshman year. I just felt like, oh, there's no way I can just play. And I feel like if I would have gone back, I think I was afraid to go back after being away from it for a couple years to go and trying out again. And I think that would have been good for me at the time, and would have just I would have learned some things and dealt with some difficult things there in high school that I think would have been helpful. And so I don't know. I think there was maybe another path of me being a football coach that was also teaching breathwork and meditation, but we'll never know.
Never too late. You look like you're young enough where maybe you could go back and be a player coach. All right, last one. So, a band or artist, ideally one that's no longer around, that you would most like to have seen.
You know, I grew up and I was my first CD that I ever got. I got a boombox and a CD for my birthday. It must have been the year, I don't know, 2000 or something. Whenever Smash Mouth Astro Lounge album came out, and that song All Star was so popular, even before that movie Shrek made it more popular. But I would have liked to see Smash Mouth live in like those early 2000s when Steve Harwell, I think that was his name, when he was still alive. I think that would have been I think that would have been cool.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because a lot of the guests that I talk to tend to be a little older than you are. And so Beatles is a regular theme, or, like Prince, or, the like. I actually got a chance to see Smash Mouth in a small club in Providence, Rhode Island called Lupo the Butchers. And the reason I saw them is I knew who they were, and I was, not sad to see them, but a close friend of mine, almost like a cousin, was in the band Citizen King at the time. They sang that song, I've Seen Better Days. And so they were opening up for Smash Mouth. So I did actually get to see them, and they were quite fun, and it was in that time frame. So it makes me a little bit happy, Charlie, that at least one of my guests, I get to see the band that they had wanted to see. So there we go.
That's cool. That's cool. Um, Okay. Also, okay. I just thought of two people that came to my mind that I was impressed with.
Good. I was going to say we'll wrap up with that, and if not, then you can reach out to me. We'll put it in show notes. But who are your
Yeah.
people?
So one is so we at the retreat center, when I worked at a retreat center, I did a bunch. I was an event manager, and so I got to meet some really cool people that have like come through and hosted their programs at our retreat center. And I really was there's a couple that teaches a yoga workshop there every year. Travis Elliott and Lauren Ekstrom, and they have their own like yoga thing going on online, and they were just such cool people to meet, and they just seemed to be really living their practice, and I got to sit in on some of their sessions, and I was just like it resonated so much with me. So those I really would give them a shout out as really cool people that I've met.
Well, great choice and off the beaten path, but relevant, I guess, get what we talked about today. So I appreciate you taking the time, Charlie. It was fascinating to have this conversation. Thank you for teaching us a little bit about what did you say the name of the breath was? The
Ujjayi breath or victory
Ujjayi breath, victory breath. I'm going to think about doing that because, again, your visual of imagine you're trying to fog up a window on a cold day. I totally get that. And then close your mouth and do it in and out. And so
Yeah.
I'll give that a little practice. But
Yeah, give it a shot.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron.